Well, hello and welcome to the Alliance Against Seclusion and Restraint live series. My name is Guy Stevens. I am the founder and executive director of the Alliance Against Seclusion and Restraint. I'll also be the host for the podcast here for the next hour and 15 minutes or so. Really excited to have you here today. We've got a special guest with us today, Yeiter, who I'll be introducing here in just a few minutes. But before I do, tell you a little bit about the Alliance, if this happens to be the first time you're joining us. And if it is, let us know, because we're always interested to see who is joining us. But the Alliance Against Seclusion and Restraint was formed about 6 years ago, a little over 6 years ago. Formed initially really focused on the issue of restraint and seclusion, although our work is really far broader than that. It's not just restraint and seclusion in a school context. It's restraint, seclusion, suspension, expulsion, corporal punishment at an even higher level. It's really about all the things that we often do to others, very often in the name of behavior. So there are a lot of things that are done to other people in the name of behavior that can lead to a lot of harm, a lot of trauma, and a lot of difficulty. So we focus on really trying to influence changes. We work to influence changes in laws and policy. We do a lot of work around education, which is why we do this podcast. We've been doing the podcast for about 5 years now. Have brought many amazing guests to share with our community, and really the hope of that is just to share better ways, better ideas. Many of you that are familiar with the work that we do, you might hear us kind of talk about some of our principles and the work that we do. We really advocate for trauma-informed, neuroscience-aligned, neurodiversity-affirming, relationship-driven, and collaborative approaches. So now that you know a little bit about us, a couple of quick announcements before I introduce our guest. I do want to share with you that we have a sponsor for our podcast this year, Supportable Solutions. Supportable Solutions is a coaching consulting company owned by Connie Persick, who is a friend, a collaborator, a colleague, somebody that does some amazing work. Developed something called the Why Toolkit, which is a alternative approach to looking at understanding kind of the deeper why behavior. Also does a lot of coaching through Supportable Solutions. I'm going to share with you a short introduction to some of the coaching work that they do, just to give you an idea of who Supportable Solutions is and what they do. And we thank Connie and Supportable Solutions for sponsoring the podcast.
Supportable Solutions, your partner in educational excellence. We provide coaching for schools of all sizes and age groups. Let's dive into a case study. Our support led to tangible results. A middle school student's understanding of expectations soared from 34% to a whopping 70%. Through our coaching, teachers learned the power of student input. This simple strategy led to a significant increase in students' understanding and appreciation of their classroom expectations. We didn't stop there. We coached teachers on strategies to explicitly teach expectations, procedures, and routines. Empowering educators, one strategy at a time. Thrilled? That's an understatement. Discover how you can implement these change strategies today at supportablesolutions.com.
And we thank Connie and Supportable Solutions for their support of our podcast, and encourage you to check them out, supportablesolutions.com. I do want to mention one quick announcement before we get to our guest, and that is, let me bring this up here. We have a really amazing event coming up here next month, really just a couple weeks away at this point. We're almost 2 weeks out. We're holding another virtual conference. We did a virtual conference in January, and had a really great list of speakers, and had over, I think, 500 people that eventually joined us from all over the world. This event is called Beyond Behaviorism, and it is really focused on kind of that idea of what I was talking about a few minutes ago. How do we move into directions that are trauma-informed and neuroscience-aligned, relationship-driven, collaborative, and neurodiversity-affirming? This is going to be a 2-day event, and during the 2-day event, you're going to hear from 13 live speakers. We have 4 additional presentations that will be available on the recordings. You get 6-month access to recordings. It's $79 for the event. We've got some really amazing sponsors as well that now are sponsoring the event, and I'll just introduce you to some of our sponsors here real quick. We also have some really exciting door prizes as well. So our sponsors, we have Making Sense of Autism. We also have Intentional Teaching Solutions, Studio 3 out of the UK. Revelations in Education, Dr. Laurie Desautel's, Career Walk Academy. We've got Jumpstart Mastery, Attachment and Trauma Network, Assistaware, and Heartstrong International. Some really great door prizes as well. So if you go to the event, you have an opportunity to win an amazing door prize. So definitely check it out. We'll put the link in the chat. So if you're interested in finding out more, you can find out more about the event. So with that, let's get to why we are here today. You're not here just to listen to me talk. However, before I bring our guest up, I do want to ask you if you're watching live, and it looks like a number of people are. If you're watching live, let us know in the chat who you are, where you're from. It's always fun to see who's joining us, where are you joining us from. I know we get people from all over the world that will join us, and it's a lot of fun to kind of see who's here and see some of the familiar names as well. So with that, let me go ahead and bring our guest up here, and I'm gonna read your intro here. And I'll just kind of preface this by saying that doing this work at the Alliance, one of the things that happens is I occasionally get emails or messages or calls from people who have found some of the work that we're doing, who the work connects with, and I've had this amazing opportunity to meet some really incredible people who have been doing this work and on this journey far longer than I have. I'm going to introduce you here in a moment to Yeiter, who is somebody that kind of fits that description, and somebody that I got the opportunity to know a bit and learn a little bit about. Yeiter has about 15 years of personal commitment to specifically supporting people who often find themselves living in a status he names kind of a reputation of challenging behavior. He draws on a rich personal history, his time in the company of people defined by the story of challenging behaviors really begins back in around 1971 in an unreformed backward, and continues in attempts to reform institutional by implementing behavioral treatments and really the move into local group homes and day programs and the implementation of integrated special education and the development of individualized supports and work roles of establishing people in their own homes. Yeiter's been doing this work and really making a positive difference in people's lives. Has taken many roles throughout your life: ward attendant, behavior specialist, administrator, consultant, teacher. Of course, you wrote a book as well, which is called Lessons in Listening, and that's available on Inclusion Press. We'll include a link to that as well in the chat. And as I was looking at that today, as I was getting ready for you to join us, there was a quote in there that just kind of really stuck with me. And the quote was, he has the courage to state the obvious, that change begins with us, within our souls, not the externals of another person's behaviors. And that really stuck with me. And of course, when we talked previously, I felt like you had a lot of wisdom to share, and was eager to have you kind of join our audience and share a little bit about your life, your work, and the things that you've been doing. So Yeiter, thanks for joining me today. Really excited to have you here and have you. You're going to do a little bit of a presentation, and then we're going to have a discussion. So thanks for being here today.
Yeah. So are you...
So what I'm going to do is I'm going to go ahead and bring your presentation up, and give me 1 second to get that on my screen. And what we're going to do is we're going to let you go through your presentation, and after your presentation, I'll come back and we'll do a little bit of Q&A. People that might be watching live, if you have a question, welcome to put it in the chat anytime, but we'll do some questions after the presentation as well. So let me go ahead and get your presentation up on the screen here. So bear with me, and I'm just actually going to get that moved over to my other screen. And if all goes well, we will get that here in 1 second.
So do I disappear when that screen comes up?
No, everybody's going to still see you. Oops, and for some reason I'm seeing on both of my screens right now, which I do not want. So bear with me for 1 second as I fix this. And PowerPoint sometimes gives me a little bit of fun here. Give me 1 second. All right, so I'm going to go ahead and bring it up. So give me a second, and I may have to figure something out here, but it should just take a second. All right.
Technical difficulties. Or
That's right. Yeah, sometimes there's some, but I think once we get started here, we won't have any problem at all.
Yeah.
And we will go to the window, and there we go. All right,
Awesome.
So I have your screen up on the screen, and what I'm going to do is I'm going to go into presentation mode, and I'm going to disappear. And if you need anything, you'll be able to call on me, and I'll pop up here as well. So I'm going to get your screen in presentation mode, and you can take it away. So give me about 3 seconds, and you can get started.
Perfect. Okay. Ready? Okay. So, as Guy noted, I had a long history. I'm not exactly sure how much wisdom I have sometimes, but I know I beat my head against a wall for a long time trying to figure this stuff out. And it's not only what I figured out, but I've been blessed to know some pretty amazing people in the field over the 50 years that I was in it. People like Mark Gold and John McGee, who has created Gentle Teaching, and Mark Gold is somebody I'll talk about later. Wolf Wolfensberger, John O'Ryan. It's been an amazing journey for me to understanding what's going on in the lives of people with disabilities and the various roles that I had. And I want to sort of, before I sort of have a chat with Guy after this, I wanted to sort of lay out to people just a sort of general presentation of what it is that we're going to be talking about. As you mentioned, I have a book, but I'm going to abbreviate that for you in the next, hopefully 20 minutes or so. Try to keep my eye on the clock. So step one in getting into this whole business of behavior, which leads into the issues of restraint and seclusion, which I think if we can deal more effectively in understanding what's going on with the behavior, for the most part, I've been able to avoid or move away from people being restrained and secluded and so forth. So the first step is that we begin to understand that the problem is not in the person, generally speaking, or if it is, we might have some play in that as well. And I've worked with so many parents and direct support staff and social workers and so forth over the years, and a lot of times they're not so open to this idea. So I've had to get a little more clever about how to present it to them so that they'll begin to understand that they need to sort of think about what's going on with them. So seeing the problem in the person, I think, guys, or the work that you've been doing over the years, which by the way is incredible, awesome. I've sort of watched you from early on build this organization, bring awareness and education to people, which is it's really awesome. So it's a business of understanding that we might be at least one of the sources of the problem, or whoever's supporting the individual. And we can go to the next slide. So the number one question that I get every time I've done a consultation, or going way back in the beginning of my work in the dark halls of the institutions that we used to have, is what do you do when so-and-so does something, whether they're throwing something or hitting you or running away or whatever the problem behavior is defined as being. People want to know what to do. And there's no books written about that, really. I don't think so. I've worked with people who, decided to take all their clothes off in the middle of a bank at a busy time on Friday. And I honestly didn't know what to do about that. I mean, their pants are hanging from the chandelier. This is a true story. I can't make this stuff up. And I've got an individual who's 26 years old running around the inside of the bank with no clothes on, and the police are closing in, the guards in the bank. And I basically, I'm just trying to get Jim outside of the bank and calm down. Or I've worked with people that would just fall to the sidewalk and start masturbating, for example, or that can be pretty embarrassing. Or just all sorts of different kinds of things happen. And I don't, the answer to what to do, I've got to the point where I just shrug my shoulders and I go, I don't know. What do you do when somebody takes their clothes off or decides to attack somebody or throw things around the room. And there's things that we can do proactively that I'll be talking about, but in the heat of that moment, when you're confronted with a problem behavior with somebody doing something that you don't understand, it's really not a place to focus on, is what I've found. And that's usually where people go, is they want to know what to do, and everybody's struggling to give them an answer, and things usually just go around in circles. So there are proactive things that we'll talk about shortly. What's important in this is to start thinking about how to be, and that's usually hard work. I'm not going to make a small issue of it. How to be patient, forgiving, valuing, and loving in the midst of a heated crisis with somebody is very difficult. But what I found to be true is that, and this is not to, again, to diminish what the individual is trying to tell us by their behavior, but there's a bit of a drama going on, is what I would call it, a bit of, street theater sometimes. And it's important for us not to sort of get pulled down into that and be reacting to it. And the better approach is to kind of lead the emotional dance, is what I would call it, and which can be really challenging if you're, not only, I mean, I'm often working with people that have been basically under attack for years, if not longer, by this individual doing things. And a lot of times, especially for parents, that can be exceedingly draining if they're not getting sleep and they're constantly dealing with things being torn apart and getting hurt. It's very difficult to pull yourself together and change your emotional tone. But that's where, I try to support people to get to that point, so that, the person's being very dramatic and very violent and very angry. We need to be having, like, life is wonderful, and I'm having fun, and I want you to have fun too. Try to create a space where you're sort of trying to move the person out of being a dark thundercloud and to some joyful activity. We'll get to talking about that as well. So, and yeah, next slide, I guess. So there's this idea of valuing the person, and which is a little different. I say this mostly for parents. It's a little different than love. I mean, obviously, parents love their children, and I do, direct support people and others involved, teachers, say they love the children as well, but sometimes that's a little thin in my experience. But certainly parents. I worked with a woman, Lois, for example, in the Berkshires with David, and her husband had committed suicide. He was a Vietnam vet and shot himself in the face right in front of David, probably 10 yards away, a year prior to me getting involved. And David had become quite violent, and he was a 6-year-old kid with Down syndrome. And anyway, the point of my story here is when I went there, I asked Lois, the mom, who was a sheep. She was like Arnold Schwarzenegger in build. I mean, because she had a sheep farm and very hardy woman. And I said, well, why don't we do something to see, kind of, I want to get a sense of how you are with your son. His name is David. So we did dishes, and he was doing the task of dishes, and I was going to demonstrate. I think maybe I demonstrated first doing something with the dishes with him. This is like maybe 15 years ago. And then she did some stuff with him, and she was grabbing him and yelling at him. I mean, I was at the point where I felt like a mandated reporter, to rate her in terms of human rights violations or something to that effect. But I didn't, and that thing was over, and I recorded this on video. And it was like 9 o'clock at night out in the Berkshires, and I was packing up and getting ready to leave. And Lois asked me if I would show her the video, which I did. And she left the room, and I wasn't exactly sure why. And she came back 5 minutes later with tissues in her face, basically. She said something like, I can't believe what a monster I was. And to her credit, going back to the first slide, she began to realize how her manner with David needed to change. She needed to come to reckoning with that. And there was no doubt that she loved her son at all. But that's what I mean when we talk about value as a person. I needed to do with Lois some conscience raising about how she'd been thinking about her son, which was a lot of what she was doing was fueled by her upbringing, by the psychological therapy people that were involved in this case, telling her that, David needed to be timed out or punished and those kinds of things. And so we kind of had to sort of clean that up a little bit. And I don't know, I was there close to midnight, and it was snow still out, and we went outside, and David actually pushed her into a snowbank, and she came out of the snowbank. I thought she was going to whack him, but she just turned that around, and she pushed him down in the snowbank. We ended up having a snowball fight out there. Yeah. So valuing the person, it's probably the first place to begin, and the question is to ask, and I think the supportability thing, it looked like that outfit that you brought up earlier, Guy, they talked about sort of getting to know who the person is. And what I used to do, and it's got harder to do over the years because people have gotten busier and it's harder to get people together sometimes, but we used to have 8-hour sessions where we talk about who is David, and we'd start with basic demographics briefly, but then we'd move into stories about David growing up, and little stories about his life, like that he, whatever those stories might be, they would reveal a lot more about who David was than all the psychological, social reports and all that sort of stuff. And when we get a bunch of stories together over the period of time of his life with Dad and life with his maybe other relatives and his first days at school and so forth like that, we would have some sense of themes we could then start to identify in terms of his life as a 6-year-old kid. And from there, then it's not so difficult to begin to imagine themes. So if somebody's experienced lots of rejection, what do they need? And you don't need to be a rocket scientist to know the answer to that. Well, it needs acceptance, belonging, things like that. And so then we'd go about trying to figure out how to make those things happen. So understanding who the person is and their life stories beyond the medical records is essential. So next slide, Guy. So the idea of unmet needs, for example, I worked with a man named Michael Kendrick back in the 80s who taught me this idea. And that's all. You can basically figure things out just by trying to figure out what needs aren't being addressed for the person and meeting them. And I'm talking about fundamental needs, and that's in one of the next couple of slides. I'll give you a sense of what those are. And then one of the men that when I met Michael Kendrick, we worked with a guy who was beating up his 2 housemates and his staff and threatening them with a butter knife and so forth and so on. And what we set up for this guy, Mark, who's a 21-year-old guy with autism, was to give him his calendar, his social calendar. The analogy doesn't go so well today, but give him the social calendar of the President of the United States, in terms of it's going to be like his day is going to be one thing right after another, and we're going to involve him in that in terms of what he really wants to do. There's some have to do's and things like that that you got to sort of build into the recipe. But basically, we wanted to keep him busy and in ways that were contributing to his housemates, like hospitality at dinner time, like he might help serve meals to his two housemates or set the table or things like that, making life fun and so forth and so on. And he was a big problem. I mean, people were at the point of nobody wanted to work with him. And within a month, you would never know that there were any issues with Mark. So this sort of fits with the second point, which is have a plan. I can't tell you how many special ed classrooms and inclusion classrooms I've been into where they're working with somebody who's has a difficult reputation, and people will say, well, okay, now it's time we're going to read that book we started reading yesterday, and they can't find it. Just real simple things like that. So it's being prepared and I mean, I think Guy can appreciate this, and we prepare to have this presentation for you, and we put some effort into it. It's not like I just show up and make stuff up. I value those of you that are listening and watching this right now to try to give you some relevant information. So, I prepare and I have a plan to do, and, we had some technical difficulties, which Guy, thank God, knew how to handle. So that's kind of how it needs to work with people. You need to have a plan. You need to have a lot of thought go into it. And the idea of it was, again, I think you mentioned, guys, a sort of relationship base of the approach that we want to take with people is key. And that's all the work I did was really focused on relationship, in terms of helping Lois understand her son David and many other sort of families and programs that I've worked with. And one of the ideas that we can talk about is task as a vehicle. And it's like when you're with somebody else, there's usually you're not just sitting having a conversation. Well, not all the time, at least. Maybe you're playing basketball, or you're watching TV, or making a meal together, or chucking wood together. I live out in the woods, so that's one of my fun things to do, is stacking wood, and with my son. And that's like a vehicle, like we're going fishing, and we can have a few beers and talk about what is going on with the politics and stuff in our relationship. But there's a task at the center of it, and a lot of times for people with disabilities, the task becomes an obstacle. You say, well, we're going to move on to this task, and the person doesn't want to do it, and and then all hell breaks loose because the person doesn't want to do what you want them to do. And non-compliance is the label that usually is stamped on that. So effective teaching comes into this, and especially for kids in school. I've been retired for the most part I'm retired, but for the years I haven't been involved in schools, it only goes back maybe 4 or 5 years. I continue to find teachers and special ed teachers that didn't know how to teach effectively towards success. And you can imagine if you're a little guy in school and you've got some issues with you that make you stand out as somebody with a disability, you want to be successful. You want to feel good about yourself and so forth and so on. And failure doesn't do that for most people. So teaching for success, Mark Gold, I would just have you make note and Google Mark Gold, because he's probably one of the most amazing teachers in all the 50 years I've been in the field. He died, unfortunately, towards the end of the 70s, but he was way ahead of his time in terms of how to teach effectively. And his work's still being carried on by some people down south. If you're interested, I can give you that information as well. So next slide. So these are just quick things. Observation, using video. I mean, a lot of times especially it's true for parents. It got harder to do this in schools with all the HIPAA stuff going on, but it's worth its weight in gold to have, if you as a parent get some video footage of what's going on between you and your son or daughter, and then just look at it. You don't have to share it with anybody else. You just look at it. You're probably going to see things that you didn't realize that you were doing in terms of your countenance, your sort of posture, and so forth. So that's one huge tip and it's really, again, it's studying, your behavior, not so much, the person that you're working with or, trying to raise as a kid, but predictability is a big thing that hopefully most people know about. I would often have people do an exercise called morning routine, where everybody would write down what their morning routine is in somewhat detailed fashion, and then on short paper rather, and then exchange it with somebody else and say, okay, now you're going to be your morning routine. And that didn't go so well for people to, it's like, well, the first thing I do when I wake up in the morning is have a cup of coffee and a cigarette. And now I can't do that anymore. I've seen that over and over. So it's the person who it's their routine, it's their flow of life through the day. It's not, and depending who's coming to work that day or who's going to be supporting me that day, a lot of times it ends up being their routine and not mine. And that's an issue also of having a person having some sense of control over their life. Fun and joy, I mentioned earlier, is you got to be a little crazy sometimes, and if you need, a lot of people need help with that. I noticed I did initially. It was serious as a heart attack, but I've learned that, that didn't get me anywhere. I really needed to just get silly, and I'll just make stuff up. I'll start singing, if it's grade school kids, I'll start singing, what am I trying to say? The cow goes moo and the pig goes oink oink. Whatever that song is. I can't remember it right now. Anyway, sharing control, letting them be in charge, sometimes telling you what to do, and sort of, structuring things so that, there's, the other person has some idea of how to do that. And, but it always feels a little risky to me doing that. I worked with a woman once that was told to sit in the chair all day by her mom, and I was coming in to do the coverage with her, and mom left. And I'm not going to make her sit in the chair all day. So I said, so what do you want to do, Annie? And she's basically told me to go sit in another room. So I did. And then she came in and she said, Mr. Yeiter, I want you to do this, and, get a Coke out of the refrigerator for her, or something like that. And it was one of the first times that I tried doing this, and it was a little scary, but by the end of it, we were playing cards at the kitchen table and having a great time, and she wasn't being a problem at all. Next one. Okay, now this is kind of the meat and potatoes. You're going to have to, I'll say, can you see me, Guy? So I'll go like this one. So human perception is all the sensoria we're talking about. We're talking about, smell, taste, hearing, sight, touch. All the sensoria around human perception are first. Okay. Next. Always evaluative. So human perception, this is scientifically, there's research on this. So human perception is always either positive or negative. It's never neutral. Even little kids, when they put a spoonful of ground up broccoli in their mouth, they go yuck, and they spit it out. And you put ice cream in, they go yum. And it's right from the get-go, our perceptual apparatus is kicking and evaluating things very quickly. And in terms of like when you meet a person for the first time, I think it's like 3 to 7 seconds. We size people up. Okay, next. And the thing about it is it's often not conscious. You're not sitting there saying, okay, I see Guy. Let me see. He's got a beard. He's got these weird cans on his head. You're not even thinking about it. It's going at light speed in your head. You're firing off things based on how you were brought up, what you learn from the social media. I mean, for people with disabilities, you can look at how's the film industry portray people with disabilities over the years, for example, or how are they portrayed in the media. When you're moving a group home into a neighborhood and the neighborhood is not wanting that. This goes way back into the 70s and 80s when that was happening, but people weren't too thrilled to have a group home next to them. Negative perception will lead to negative treatment. And the next one, positive, you can't see that so well. Positive perception leads to positive treatment, which is kind of a generalization. So if you view somebody negatively, it's more than likely that they're going to get negative treatment. And you think about this in terms of how people with disabilities are, getting treated rather than the I don't know what you call normal people anymore, but kids are getting restrained, and it's not the kids that are neurotypical, I guess is the word, right? Generally, I haven't heard of that happening too much. I never got restrained, other than my friends had to restrain me here and there, wrestling around and stuff. But I've never had a behavior program. I've never, but people with disabilities have this restraint issue, getting secluded, timeout, all this stuff. So it has to do with perception. And so the teachable point from this is, which goes into a lot of detail beyond what we can cover here, is that you want people to look good. You want them to have the right behaviors when they go into a restaurant. You might want to work on teaching people sort of how to dress or how to behave when you're in a restaurant, and that can be rehearsed. There's all sorts of ways of teaching that, to avoid them being seen in a negative way. So next one, Guy. So you can just sort of click all these out. So people with disabilities are people first. And this is basically saying that people are more like us. People have disabilities, no matter how severe the disabilities are or how involved the person is with physical, cognitive disabilities, they're more like us than different, right? I mean, they have the same kinds of reaction and impacts. They have the same needs for things in life, like love, home, friends, a reason to get out of bed. And the same things that work for people without disabilities will work for people, with disabilities. Next. And that's the assumptions that I make. And this, again, I'm bring back Mark Gold, all people can change, learn, and grow. Everybody that I've ever worked with. And I've been told multiple times that so-and-so, because he's got organic brain damage, could never learn anything. So they weren't even bothered taking him to school. And I went to visit this guy. He was a 14-year-old kid. At 7 a.m, he had a whole group home to himself, and he was playing Mario Brothers on the couch. And I'm not the smartest guy in the world, but I looked at that and said, he knows where all the magic mushrooms are. He knows how this thing works, and he's blowing me away with how great he is at this game. Well, what does that say? I mean, so eventually we got Ricky back into school, and that's what gets to another whole challenge. The teachers that where he came back to were scared, or afraid of him, and they weren't very good teachers. So it was a lot of work over a period of 2 or 3 years. And but anyway, that's the assumption. The key assumption to make is that, and try to get people to take that in is not always easy. I understand, and I think it might be. So maybe one more, I think. Oh yeah. So quickly, these are the basic fundamental needs that we need to think about for people. Home is absolutely critical, especially for adults, but also true for kids who get placed in these residential programs, which I I don't mean to criticize. I haven't seen one yet where people had a true sense of home in a residential community. They kind of adapted to whatever environment they were put into. But that's, oftentimes it's like there's no other way to do things, I guess. But having relationships, intimacy, and I would add to that, being not just intimacy, but love. I did change this one, but I forgot. Um, Love and being valued, belonging. I've had periods when I moved from one town to another, and I'm in a new school, and I don't have any friends, I don't know anybody, and it's very insecure feeling, right? And people with disabilities get thrown into situations like that all the time. Um, so having a job, I did a project once where I got 4 people who were considered too disabled and too severe behavior problem that they would never be able to work or be integrated in the community and stuff. And I got all of them jobs, which I could talk about if they're interested. And they weren't problems anymore. I mean, they would love going to work every day. They were taken in by the people working with them. Um, Getting a decent education is critical. Control, I would say, is autonomy and choice, and I would add control in there, is also a very important need that needs to be addressed with people. Okay, and I think this might be the next one is the last one. Yeah, you can just fill all those out. So, getting involved with people, the first thing you need to address is that they feel safe, and creating a safe place for them. And a lot of times there's things that you can do to make that happen. Putting somebody that likes to throw things around and stuff in a room with, I don't know, one situation I remember, there was all these bins of nuts and bolts, probably 100, up against a wall, because this is kind of a sheltered workshop thing. And the guy went in there and just threw those around, breaking windows. And that wasn't a great place to bring them, to introduce them to me. And that they feel loved and valued is again, you need to teach them that they're lovable sometimes, because they've been rejected so much. And so there's a lot of work to be done there usually. And that there needs to be reciprocity. This isn't just a one-way street. I want something back. And a lot of people, that it's something they can give you a gift of making you happy or making you feel like you have meaning in their life is a cool thing to do. And that, I'm sorry. And that they feel engaged in life. Again, that goes back to what they're scheduled for the day. So I think that's it, Guy.
Okay, well, I've just made your PowerPoint go away, and it's you and I now back again, and we got through the technical part with no more problems, which is good.
You're amazing.
Yeah, that's right. Well, yeah, I first of all just appreciate all that you were sharing with us, and I was jotting down some notes as you were talking, and a couple of thoughts and questions come to mind that I want to share. But before I do, I just want to remind people that are watching live. If you're watching live and you're with us, feel free in the chat. If you have a question or a comment, you're welcome to put that in the chat, or just kind of a thought that you're having as you're watching this today. But I'm going to go ahead and get us started with a couple of questions and comments, if that's okay. And I don't know that these are any real particular order. You said a lot of things, and just occasionally I was kind of just jotting something down. You were talking about stacking wood at one point with your son, and I don't know if I shared this with you before, but my son is a forestry major, and one of the things he developed a love of fairly young was sawing down trees. In fact, he had his own chainsaw when he was probably 16 years old, and
Wow.
in fact, he really enjoyed and he's had a history of like enjoying planting trees and doing all sorts of things, but he got into cutting wood and he enjoyed it, and he really liked splitting the wood as well. And so if you went back several years ago, he developed his passion for doing this. We started creating these stacks of wood. Now at the time, we were not consuming wood in any way whatsoever. So we ended up buying a wood burning stove that we added to our house, so that we would have a purpose for all this
Good
wood.
idea.
And actually now it saves us a lot on our electric bill, and adds
Yeah.
a certain element of security when the weather gets bad. But anyway, I just was thinking about it. I was like, well, you need to come down my way if you want to stack wood. We have more stacks of wood than I can imagine. I feel like as soon as one starts getting empty, he wants to go get more. He's like, well, we need to top that off. I'm like, we've got 8 stacks of wood here. I think.
Yeah.
But anyway,
Yeah.
I'll be well off even when he's moved out in terms of having wood for a while. You said a lot that resonated with me. You were talking about non-compliance, and of course, people that join us regularly know that one of my least favorite words is compliance, because very often we see a lot of harm done when we are trying to force people to do things rather than connecting with them, understanding their needs, making them feel safe, and all of those things. And I love that you were kind of making that point, and I think you really laid it out well. What sticks out to me about a lot of what you had to share is really just the humanity of it all, right? It's having expectations. It's looking at people differently, and that's both a plus side and a negative side. On the negative side, as you mentioned, very often what people perceive, sometimes people see others as a sum of their behaviors rather than understanding their needs or their humanity. And it seems like there's such a potential for harm when that happens. And that seems to be consistent with the experience that you were sharing as well. I mean, has that been, kind of a theme throughout the work that you've done?
Still is. I mean,
Yeah.
to be honest, if I walked into a situation about a year ago, I still do work with people, especially if they're family, not so much agencies anymore, but I see somebody and all my brain just goes crazy. I mean, I get scared. I get feeling like I don't know if I can handle this. It's like over my head, and those are all initial things that I feel, and so I don't think. I mean, that's now. I've been doing this. I've been getting beat up by people for 50 years, and it just doesn't go away. That conditioning that I've had through my earlier life. But I know from experience that there is a way and it means that I need to raise my own consciousness once again and get to know the person. They're not just some scary, like you said, complex of behaviors. That there's a real beautiful person inside there somewhere.
Hmm.
Um, that's I guess that's what kept me doing this is because I kept discovering that there's and it's nasty, it's horrible and mean and scary as people could be. Underneath, they want to be loved, and it's we that have done this to them. Um, they didn't come out of the womb saying I'm going to be a pain in the neck for my entire life. They were brought to that by a number of things that we've spoken about. Well, we've talked about this before. Yeah.
Hmm.
So, yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. So I want to go back for a second. You've been in this work and in this space for quite some time, and I'm curious a couple things. One, what kind of led you in this direction, but two, and I'm going to make an assumption here, and I could be totally wrong, so you can tell me if I'm totally wrong. But as you were going into some of this work, I think it's probably safe to say a lot of the things that were traditionally being done at the time you went into this work probably go very counter to your beliefs and your values now.
Yeah.
Did you have kind of a moment where you realize like, hey, these things that we're doing, they're not working, they're harmful, so tell me a little bit about kind of what brought you to this work in the first place. And did you have a moment where you just kind of had this realization of like, oh gosh, what we're doing is just not working, and we got to do something different?
Yeah. I mean, getting into it was really, I mean, I was driving a taxi. I graduated with a BS in psychology, which was generally, in hindsight, pretty worthless. But I was trying to stay out of Vietnam, and back in the late '60s and early '70s, my draft number had come up and so forth, and And at any rate, I ended up through it's a miracle story. I didn't have to go to Vietnam. And Rudy, a classmate of mine from college, he'd been working at this place called Munson State Hospital, and he was leaving there. He became a semi-professional wrestler, actually, and now has a vineyard out in Oregon. And he said, if you're looking for work, because a partner of mine in the taxi driving world was stabbed in the back by an alcoholic one night, and I thought maybe I don't want to do this anymore. As a night shift and driving a taxi was pretty scary. So he said, you can have my job, and it's working with a bunch of women. They're going to love you, And I had no idea. I applied for the job, and the first day of work, I'm walking into a building with 150 women, all of whom, every one of them had a reputation for being a severe behavior problem. They were all put in this building on 4 different wards. And I thought I was going to be the building psychologist. I wore a tie and a white shirt that day. And that was not my job. My job was to clean up messes on the floor and put people in seclusion rooms. So I kind of did that. I did that. And I was terrified doing it. I mean, my shirts got ripped. I got feces smeared on me. It was a very dark time in my life, I would say, doing that stuff. And I was trying to understand the whole thing. And I did have some successes with people. There are stories that it would take more than the time that we have here, but I got a bit awakened that things could change. And then I got hired because I got noticed in my work with these people in this building, a woman, to be on a HIP HIST grant, I think it was called, to be a special service assistant and learn operant conditioning, 120-hour course in operant conditioning, and then do behavior mod, teaching adolescents basically toilet training and how to eat and how to get dressed and all that stuff using behaviorism. And I got to be the point where I was a staunch behaviorist, I would say. I was like, I can do anything with anybody with behavior mod. I can manipulate the environment and the function of behavior. I did that up until about, this is going through the 70s and up and through about 1982. I went to a workshop down in Massachusetts with John McGee, who was pushing this idea of gentle teaching. And that to me, I said, I want to learn what you're talking about, gentle teaching, which was very relationship based. I went out to Nebraska for a week and worked at a clinic that he had out there where he would bring in some of the more difficult people from all around the country. And he'd have teams of people that were interested in learning gentle teaching come to this place in Nebraska. And it changed my life. I mean, I had to let go of the behavior stuff, which was really hard because I had so much invested in it, which is another one of my theories about life, is that the more we invest in things that maybe are wrong to get out of them, like psychiatrists, not to pick on them entirely, but well, maybe I will.
It's a safe place here. Go ahead.
Well, any psychiatrists out there, get in the chat. They do therapy and drugs, pretty much. That's what they do. And neither one of those things is proven all that effective in people with mental health issues over the years. I've worked with people with mental health issues that are shaking from the medications, and the therapy's going nowhere. And but they've invested thousands of dollars and years of time in becoming a psychiatrist, right? So what are you going to do? I mean, I only know one psychiatrist that basically threw all that away and did something entirely different. He's working in Massachusetts now, Andre, a beautiful man from Canada. And he talks about the mental health system as being diabolically evil. To get to the, I mean, he's got a lot of credibility on that. So anyway, there's other things that influenced me along the way to keep sort of shifting. I mean, I've had several sort of periods where I had to admit that I was going the wrong way,
Yeah. Yeah, I mean that's. I think I was thinking as you were sharing your story, and I know a number of people that I've been lucky enough to get to know that have roots that are similar, similar to yours, and a number of people who have used terms like recovering behaviorist and other things,
Yeah,
talking about kind of how they had this moment and they realized what they were doing wasn't working and that it was but it's hard. And you talk about this being 1980 something, that you're kind of, you go to this this training and you begin to kind of really question that, even though you were strongly believing what you were doing and saw the power of what you were doing, you suddenly began to question it. But here we find ourselves in 2025, and many of these approaches are very prevalent and very common in our schools and other settings. And you knowing people like yourself that have been on this journey, you would think and hope that maybe we would have arrived at a different place by now, but we don't seem to have. It seems like a lot of these approaches are still the very common approaches.
yeah. I think it's because it's easy. I mean,
Right.
I can be a behavior consultant and come in, write and give you a plan and leave. And
Yeah.
I worked with one guy, Charlie, who was punching people in the face, and the behavior guy that was with him, um, the parents basically were telling, we're going to bring in Yeiter, we're going to get rid of you, and he was not happy about that. And I met with him, and he tried to convince me to come back to behaviorism, and he kept pushing this evidence-based practice thing. Like
Right.
I'm an evidence-based practice. And I said, well, you've been working with Charlie for 2 years and he's still punching people in the face. What? I don't know. What? Tell me what I'm missing with this. Like, what's the evidence? And and I'm not, to blow my horn a little bit. I mean, I spent 3 days after that hanging out with Charlie and the staff and the parents, and basically I said to the parents, there's too much control stuff going on around him at this point. You need to back off and give him some breathing space. And I gave them specifics on how to do that. And he stopped punching people in the face.
Mhm,
Now,
mhm,
there's a not entirely positive ending to that story, but it was based on, there was staff turnovers, the parents, there's so many variables that come into play with
mhm,
some folks. I mean, I've had successes with people and then found out years later that, they were back in the behavior bin again.
mhm.
Um, so it's a lifelong struggle sometimes, I think, especially for families, parents, to try to hold the line on that.
Mm, mhm, mhm. So reflecting on your time in and one of the things you said that really resonates with me is kind of this idea that you're always kind of learning, and if you learn something new, sometimes it's a way to it's hard to let go of things, but it's really important. And then I often share the Maya Angelou quote, kind of the do the best you can until you know better, then when you know better, do better. That's what this should be a lot about. But a lot of people get stuck, and a lot of people get stuck in what they're doing. And it's funny, I have a complicated relationship when it comes to things like evidence
Mm.
based. There's a science part of my brain that likes that idea. Oh, evidence based, that sounds
That's
but there's the
great.
reality. The reality of it as well is the evidence is based on the questions you've asked and the things that you've done, and often don't tell the whole picture. And we can look no further than looking at something like ABA, which if you listen to the autistic community that have been exposed to ABA, often will describe the trauma of
Yeah.
what they were being put through. Yet there's a huge base of evidence, of course, much of which, if you really drill down, is somewhat questionable. But certainly you can do studies that will give you evidence to say something works. But I guess at what cost and what impact, and I think that's a really important thing, and putting people first and understanding the impact. I mean, to me, you can't have evidence of something that um, is involving human beings without having the voices of human beings that have been part of that and call it valid. I mean, it's just such an important part of that.
I think it's, I mean, I go back, I mean, I think the work you're doing is almost beyond words. I just, so, I mean, I think that the number of podcasts that you've done over the years and the people that you're collecting under your wings with this organization, and some stellar people that have real credibility. I don't know what it's going to take for ABA to finally ride off into the sunset, but I mean, Herb Lovett, who's one of my heroes in it, he basically prophesied it'd be dead by, by 2000. And yet it seems to be growing, and it's it's mind-boggling, that whole thing. But I think, we need to sort of keep looking to try to find ways to support. I mean, a lot of times what I would see was that the alternative to behavior mods is just there's not a lot of people out there like me willing to go into a situation and do the relationship-based approach. Gentle teaching managed that was getting pretty popular for a time, but I think it's dying, for a lot of reasons, in terms of entropy, probably. It's just it got too big for its britches in some ways. But there's nobody. I don't find a lot of people like me. A lot of like there's a few people back in the 90s that were doing similar work to myself. I'd always try to find people. There's one that I know down in Pennsylvania, but he's just retired. Guy named Ed. It's all like, well, if what are parents going to do? I mean, they've got to have somebody, they've got to have some system. And I don't know how to, I've tried to figure out in my own life how to bring this to be a more systemic play.
Right.
So that parents can just call up and say, we're son's beating the hell out of us. We need help. Can you help us? And there's nobody to call except the ABA place. Well, I guess I'll have to do that, because they're desperate. So I think, again, the work you're doing is critical to build a critical mass of evidence that, and maybe inspire people like that supportability.
Supportable solutions, right? Yeah.
I mean, I'm interested in looking into them a little bit more, see how widespread they are.
Yeah. Well, and I mean, having been doing, having been doing on the mission of the work of the Alliance for the last several years, I mean, one of the, I think, really one of the most powerful things, and I think one of the most humbling things has been to meet a lot of. I mean, there are people out there. There are amazing people out there that are doing incredible things, moving things in the right direction. There are approaches that are far better than a lot of the things that are out there happening. But the problem of scale has always been a real problem. That and support and the idea of behaviors. I'm obviously not a big fan, and the thing that you can say as well that some of these things work in the short term, but they're not really working in the long run, and they're not really working in a way that's respectful to the human being that you're working with. But unfortunately, because people will sometimes think about that short term without asking that important question you asked earlier when you're talking about one of the stories about, well, you've been doing this for so long and this is still happening. What do we need to do differently? And I think unfortunately sometimes people don't ask that question. But looking back over your career and your time in this work, certainly there have been there have been some things that have been positive from 1970 until now. There have been some things that have been positive. But so to tell me, what are the things that you think have happened over this time that have been steps in the right direction, and what surprises you that it's still the way that it is?
Well, I think my awareness of what you guys are doing is pretty significant, and I know. And I've kind of lost touch, a little bit with what's going on recently, but in some ways, I mean, I'd like to give you a real positive answer about that, but I'm struggling.
No, I get it.
I mean, there's a workforce crisis that's been going on for quite a long time now, and trying to find people to work with people, is like the last time I worked with somebody in a residential program, it was like, there's a new person coming in every week, it's like, and the training, the education piece is also, again, I'm not aware of what's going on nationally or internationally, but it seems like there was this period there from roughly 75 to maybe 2000 where there was a lot of workshops going on, a lot of training, education opportunities for parents and for people like me to go to, and I think education is key to the conscious raising, because there's a lot of issues like spare the rod, spoil the child, simplistically.
Mhm.
We need to wrestle with that.
Well, and that's still happening. That was used as an argument. There's a
I
bill
know,
in Oklahoma. They were using that as an argument to justify
really.
corporal punishment. And of course
That whole expression, if you look it up biblically,
it doesn't
it
mean what you
doesn't
think it
mean
means, right? A
yeah,
rod is about guiding, right? Yeah, no, absolutely.
yeah,
Well, even the word discipline. I mean, discipline doesn't often. I mean, if you look at the root words, it's to teach, right? If you look at discipline through the lens of teaching, it's not about
great
doing
point.
something to somebody or a consequence. It's about how do we teach and help grow human beings, right? But people have this kind of punitive, negative, kind of approach often into doing
Yeah.
things to people. Yeah. I mean, I
And
agree with you. I mean, unfortunately, things haven't changed as much as, the fact that the fact that an alliance against seclusion and restraint exists, looking at issues where kids in schools are being physically restrained and put in seclusion closets, show that we haven't gotten as far as we might have thought we would have in this time. But, I'm even worried in the current day that, we're seeing things that look like we could be moving backwards when it comes to human rights and disability rights. And
well,
I have a lot of concern about where things are right now.
yeah, I mean, I, just not, it's a complicated point, but back after World War II, education stopped being about character building and morality. It started being about how to be successful and smart and, in the American dream thing. And so character building, even in the public schools and in the universities, there's a book written about this by David Brooks, got to be a real, and he, I think it was David Brooks that wrote this. He said that, people nowadays don't have the moral language to sort of sort out what makes sense and what's going on in this country right now. I think we all know there's something going on right now, and trying to parse that out, so trying to figure out ABA or what's going on in inclusion in the schools, the moral dimension of this is what I really push, because I understand the rights issues, and I understand, but civil rights, as far as I know, wasn't all that effective in the long run. I've heard people talk about this, like Miles Horton, who's the Highlander Center down in the South, where it gathered people like Martin Luther King and talk about the civil rights movement. But schools, like in 2000, I heard a guy speak, Jonathan Kozol talked about, he traveled all the major cities in the country and talked about schools are more segregated by color than they were before civil rights. And, in terms of inclusion, maybe, for kids with disabilities, it was 1% 20 or 30 years ago. I don't know where it's at right now. It might be more, but then I'm also looking at studies that say kids aren't being educated as well. The scores are going down. So, I don't know what's going on with that. Again, it's special ed. My wife's she was trained as a special ed teacher, and she didn't know about Mark Gold. She didn't know how to teach effectively, and that's kind of bizarre when you think about that. And I've talked to a lot of special ed teachers that don't, know how to help somebody put their pants on, or and do an analysis of just watch a video and there's like the steps to how you brush your teeth, and we can break that down so forth. So I don't, the teaching stuff is still, I think there's work to be done there. I know some people down south that are working on this, and I talk to them, and they're very frustrated. I don't. I mean, I think you're a bright star, and maybe some of the organizations that you're coming into contact are. I'm not sure how widespread that is. I tried to find somebody else. A family called me from actually it was down near your way, somewhere in Delaware, and they had a kid that was being a real problem. And I couldn't travel. It was during COVID somewhere, and I'm not traveling. I'm not taking any airplanes or buses, and but I was trying to find somebody more local to them that could, and we couldn't find anybody.
Yeah, yeah.
They were desperate,
Yeah, yeah.
So,
No, I hear you. I mean, there's absolutely kind of a crisis of support, and that's not getting any better, it seems. But listen, we've these talks always go by really quickly. We've about reached our time here, but there's a couple things I want to do before we wrap up here. One is there's just a comment here from Andy that was I think really relevant to what we were talking about. I think a lot of behavioral health programs have a sunk cost fallacy problem, kind of meaning that they put all this money into something that they have little motivation sometimes to move away from it. They continue to put money into things even though they're not working. I think a great point. Another thing I wanted to hit on quickly before we wrap up is that we mentioned earlier your book, and I'm going to actually bring it up on my screen here for a second. And I wonder if you might just tell us a little bit about your book. We'll put a link in where people can find it as well. So hopefully if all went well, I have it up on the screen now. And if you want to tell us a little bit about that, that'd be great.
Well, I think it's I tried to compile everything that I learned. It was basically started as a project just for myself. I was trying to figure out what did I accomplish in the last 50 years, given what we just talked about, how things are seemingly going backwards in some ways. And a lot of it is just stories of people that I worked with, and I think some pretty significant stories in terms of the stuff we talked about in the beginning that I presented, putting meat on the bones to all that, in terms of people's lives actually being impacted, and just the importance of the process of not only listening to what other people are saying, but listening to your own inner voice of what's going on inside of you, and even as I think it's something of a start for if people are interested in reading it. I think there's a lot of things in there that are important to sort of at least take a look at. The work of it is really, there's a lot of hard work that goes into learning how to be patient or forgiving, for example. I'm not there yet in terms of some of those kinds of things, but it's to at least have them out in the open and identified as things that we need to work on. Is kind of where I'm at with all this. All the you can look in the table of contents of the book probably if you go online. I've gotten a lot of positive feedback about it, mostly again from parents, not so much from the professional community. I think that's to be expected in my experience, but
Sure. Well, we've shared a link here to it, and we've reached the end of our time here. But I want to thank you for joining me today. Any final thoughts you want to leave us with as we wrap up today?
Say that again.
I said, any final thoughts you want to leave us with as we wrap up today?
No, I think I'm a little long-winded, I know, in some ways.
Oh, you're fine. Well, listen, I'm glad we were able.
Really appreciate.
Yeah.
I just appreciate it. Go ahead.
I'm saying I appreciate you and appreciate you joining us today. And I know when we first connected, it was just a conversation that I felt had value not only to me personally, but I thought having you join us would have value to others that are on this journey and doing this work. So I just want to thank you for being generous and sharing your time and your story with us today.
I would say that most important thing is our hearts in all this, and that's what impressed me most about you.
I appreciate that. I appreciate that. Well, we are going to let everybody go. I'm going to ask you if you'll stick around for me. I just have a short outro that'll play. And thank you, everybody that joined us today. We will see you again in 2 weeks, I believe. And don't forget about the conference coming up. You can go to our website, endseclusion.org, and find out more about it. All right. Thanks. Bye-bye.